razzle dazzle, we're the best. No, the courts aren't on your side, but they're not on the tenant side either.
Jen,
Like, you are independently wealthy when you are naked.
I am over treating property management the same as real estate sales.
I guess I'll lead the witness. I think it's freaking scammy. Welcome to Hold It with PM Jen, the show for real estate investors who buy and hold forever and ever. Amen. Welcome to Hold It with PM Jen. I'm Jen, a real estate investment educator, advocate, and broker at One Focus Property Management. This is a special bonus episode to season 1. And in my bonus episodes, I get to talk about things that aren't necessarily buy and hold, although buy and hold philosophy totally aligns with what we are talking about today. See, today we're talking about historical properties and the importance of preserving them. We're talking about it through the specific lens of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which I have an interest in. I am the owner of a colonial revival on Millionaires Row. It's this one right here at 414 West 4th Street, and it was saved from destruction in 2009, and now it has 3 apartment units and houses the headquarters of One Focus Property Management. This property is, as I said, the beginning of Millionaires Row, which is a national historic district with buildings dating back to 1855. So a very impressive stretch of properties, and we get a lot of tourism around that there. My guest today helps me share the history of Williamsport and 414 through her work as, her name is 𝐬𝐿ane, and she's helped me learn about my building. She has the company Developing History. It's a company that will research and uncover the hidden secrets of your property as long as it's in Lycoming County. She is a professional historic researcher and wrote this book, Williamsport Past and Present. It is known as the authority on the history of Williamsport. She's also the vice president of the Lycoming County Genealogical Society and is a member of the Lycoming County Historical Society. She contributes to the Society's journal and speaks at their events. Thank you for coming all the way to this studio, 𝐬𝐿ane, to share with us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, you've been researching properties in Williamsport, I think, for just about 12 years. Is that right?
It's been about that long.
About that long. So what sparked your passion for uncovering the stories behind Lycoming County's buildings?
I found that as soon as I started, I realized that all of the houses have a story to tell, and the people that lived in those houses, their stories aren't always out there right now. They're lost memories, lost stories, and I love presenting them and finding out how people lived and appreciating that life.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you wrote this book about the city. I'm just interested, what are some of your most favorite surprising or fascinating stories about Williamsport?
Well, in order to explain my first fascinating story about Williamsport, I have to explain that that's a picture book. And I took pictures from the last century, and Right. And then I took another picture standing in the exact same place at the same angle and replicated it. And what I found out was photographers stood in the middle of the street a lot. And so guess where I had to be? And that became a challenge. But as far as history goes, the one thing that I found that was very interesting is how much Williamsport didn't change. We seem to focus on the change a lot because it's very apparent. Yeah. And it turns out that a lot of Williamsport has been preserved. And in those pictures, you can really see how much. Right. And that was enlightening.
Yeah, some of these pictures here show just how much this was preserved, because we'll tell the story of how much of this is maybe original or not, but this lets us know it looks exactly the same. Right. So when we're standing on the street looking at this, it's much like it would have looked in 1903, right? Right. And that's so cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the process you take when you approach discovering a property's history, like when you did 414s?
Sure. I always start with deeds. And in Lycoming County, we have an office run by Dave Huffman, the Register and Recorder, that really helps historians by making as much as possible all of their historical documents available to the public. And it has been a godsend for historians. So the deeds are readily accessible and they're digital. And so I always start there. And then I verify information through city maps, census, directories, but I let the house lead me beyond that. I never know exactly where it's going to take me. Very recently, I found myself in my alma mater, Wilson College, because I was researching a house in Williamsport and never saw that coming. So I just let the house lead me.
Oh my gosh, that's really cool. And it sounds like it would be a lot more expensive for people like me to get these reports if we didn't have great resources, right? Because it'd be so much more time consuming.
It would be very time consuming. And when I first started, the resources weren't as actively available as they are now. And it was very difficult. Now they're getting easier and easier with digitalization. And also, once I did the first 50, I kind of got an idea of where to look.
I gotcha. So for somebody who is really interested in this personally as well and wants to know, maybe they say, oh, I'll research my own property. I think we can go to the Register of Deeds, and it sounds like there's a great resource in Lycoming County. Any other must-visit places or resources that are on your list that you might share?
Sure. I think the most important resource we have right now is the history library inside the Tabor Museum.
Oh.
It's run by the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞𝐿 Society, and the people that work there are very well versed in finding not just genealogies, but history in general. It's the most complete historical and research library in Lycoming County. So, we are always helping people look for genealogy or the history of their house, the history of their family, whatever they want. And so it's a huge resource. I use it a lot.
That's really cool. And that would be right around the 900 block of West
858.
858 West 4th Street in Williamsport is the Tabor Museum, and you could go there. Is real estate investment just so much harder than you thought? I know it seems unfair, but, and I say this with love, that's what the money's for. Taking the risk and figuring out the problems. And if you do it well, you are handsomely rewarded. Lucky for you, I've got 2 new events lined up that will change the game for you. First up, deal tours. Imagine spending an entire day with me, walking through multifamily properties available for sale, off market of course, breaking down the numbers and figuring out how to stabilize and add value like a pro. I am making that dream a reality, and whether you're actively buying or just sharpening your skills, this is where real investors learn to win. First one is in spring 2025. And this fall, the Buy Better, Hold Better Summit. One day, top-tier education, industry experts with experience in the North Central PA market who actually know what they're talking about, and the connections you need to make your investment success possible. Think of it as a masterclass in buy and hold real estate. Additionally, the room is full of people doing the same thing as you, so you can build that network with little effort. Don't forget, for the 4th year in a row, we are hosting our Williamsport area real estate investor meetups every other month in Linden. Want the inside track? Of course you do. Go to holditwithpmjen.com and register for event updates. And while you're at it, follow me, Hold It with PM Jen, on Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Helping real people grow real wealth with real estate. Well, today, as we've mentioned, I want to talk about 414 West 4th Street. And Elaine, as I said, worked up a historical report for me, and I loved getting it, and I love sharing it. And so you might be seeing this video because you have an interest in our properties, and I'm so glad to be able to share that with you. Summer and fall in the city are so nice because the season kind of starts with Little League in August, with the tourists coming for the architecture. So while families are in town for Little League, they take tours with folks from probably Preservation Williamsport and things like that, and I get to see these tour groups going around, and I love to like dip in and hear what's shared and share what I know from my report. And so that's really fun. And so it starts with Little League, and then we have right now is tour season. They're coming in leaf peeping and looking at the architecture. They're coming in buses and trolleys. And then we'll have Victorian Christmas, which is our big celebration in Williamsport of our history and of preserving it. And we put a lot of buildings on tour. So I bought the building in 2022, and I was really eager because I'd done a little light Googling. I'm an elder millennial, and I bought the building, and I'm like, oh, like it's a historic building, what's the story? And I did a little light Googling, and it had been the subject of a court battle in the late aughts. And I learned that it went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and I had heard just little stories around town when I asked about it, and I thought I want to know the facts. And so I hired Elaine, and the thing I tell people is that she showed up on that front door, on that porch, and it was time to meet her, and she shows up and she goes, I'm here, And is the basement the same size as this house? And I was like, oh, and I just kind of thought about it for a second, like, no, it's narrower. And she's like, I knew it. It's the 1968 basement. And I was like, oh my gosh, this lady. So this property was known, as we get started, if you want to know a lot about this property, just know throughout history, it's been known as a couple different addresses. 148 West 4th Street, and then there was a renumbering, right?
Right.
And when did that happen?
It happened around the 1880s, the late 1880s. It took a few years for all of the official documents to turn over.
Sure. And then at various points, we see it regarded as either 414 or 416
Sometimes
West 4th Street.
412.
Oh, and sometimes 412. Yeah. Very interesting. Now, can you tell us the beginning of the property from where it started till about 1890? So 1867 to 1890. What was going on with this property then?
Well, at that time, it was not the property that we're looking at on the screen behind us. It was a frame building, and it was smaller, hence the reason for your smaller basement, because that was what it was sitting on. And it had a small porch on the corner of it. It had a bump out on the east side of it. It had a driveway on the east side, as it does now, but it was a completely different building.
Right. Have you ever seen an image of it or a drawing?
I've seen a drawing.
I see.
In the maps, they do some drawings, and there's an 1872 map that shows a rough sketch of it that is an interpretation of an artist. And I don't know how accurate that was. And then there's insurance maps that show it. Again, they're drawn and probably not to scale.
Sure.
So we just have a guess of what it was.
Yeah, and that's how we know about the bump outs because of those drawings and because,
Right.
of course, the basement footprint.
Right.
Yeah. Then in 1890, Dr. John Hunt purchases it. And
Yes, he does.
That begins a 50-year period of ownership by the Hunt family. Tell us a little bit about what went on during that time.
Well, it separated from the first 10 years and the last 40. The first 10 years, it appears as though he may have done something to the back of it, although again, we're just trying to figure that out from drawings. So it could just be a different artist doing the rendition. But he was a doctor, and as was normal at that time, he had his practice inside the house. And so he may have had an addition on the back. And then 10 years later, he decided to change that.
What did he do?
Well, he sold the house to his father, which seems like an odd move, but his father bought it for $8,000, which is the money he needed to tear it down and rebuild. And his father never lived there. So they moved next door temporarily, and then they built this new brick house that you're seeing and moved back in. And that had definitely had his office on the west side, which if you're looking at it is the left. And we know a lot about that house because the outside of it still stands.
Yeah. And he was a physician. He was seeing patients for healthcare concerns.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of doctors did that inside their homes. That was very common.
Very common. Okay. And so he builds a brand new property, 1901, 1902.
Right.
Why is that significant?
Well, it's a colonial revival, and it's significant because for a little bit of time, the colonial revival that is standing was thought to be 10 years older than it was. And it's actually 1901, which is right in line with when colonial revivals were coming up in Williamsport. But it also makes it a very historical building because it's 1901, 02. They started in one year, finished in another year. And it became the attention of preservationists. After 100 years, it became important that we keep these buildings, especially on Millionaires Row. So that date becomes very important, that it is as old as it is.
Yeah. There's, I don't like to do this too often, but I'm just going to read a little bit because I love the way it's written. This was in the evening news, and it's just a small notice, and it's the handsome new home. Dr. Hunt's residence and offices now occupied. And it says the handsome new home, which Charles D. Hunt is building at number 414 West 4th Street, is almost finished. The work having progressed far enough to allow the family to occupy a portion of the house, which is one of the finest and most costly ever erected in Williamsport. It is pretty neat, comfortable, and convenient in all of its arrangements without being unduly elaborate or loud. And it goes on to talk about that his offices are going to be located on the west side of the house, which would be that way.
Right.
So on the left side, which makes sense. There's a separate door that you can barely tell in that picture, but there's a separate entrance that would have been the office or
Right.
physician entrance. Yeah, and then in 1915, we know the garage was built.
Right.
And that is actually, we have some photos here, and I'm not sure when they date to, but the garage is visible in the back, that 1915 garage, and that still stands. It's a
Right.
brick garage. Some differences, I believe, would be that the original roof was slate.
Right.
And this
It
one,
was.
of course, isn't. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's real good reason for that.
Right.
You've heard it 1,000 times. Your network is your net worth. But what are you actually doing about it? See, the most successful people I know dedicate time and money to growing and strengthening their networks. And I don't mean by joining Facebook groups and posting that you're looking for deals. Here's a tip: that doesn't work. You have to be in person with people who share your interests and be willing to help each other. At the Williamsport Area Real Estate Investors Meetup, the largest in the region, we do just that. We're focused on making sure you meet people that help you achieve your goals. This isn't one of those events where speakers pitch you their overpriced courses or books. Nope. We bring in legit experts to drop actual value, and it's totally free. For now. But don't hold me to that forever, because this is too good and the room only holds so many. Get the dates, times, and speaker lineup at holditwithpmgen.com. That's holditwithpmgen.com, and I will see you there.
There is a real good reason, and we're getting to that. And then the second generation of the Hunt family took over, but they are called by Mr. and Mrs. LaRue Davies, because of course we go by our husband. So it was the daughter of the Hunts inherited the home. They owned the property, lived, and also practiced medicine there from 1927 to 1975. And it looks like then when Helen passed, the new chapter begins. In 1984, the physician, Dr. 𝐾𝐿, purchased it, and that's when things get really interesting. Tell us, so he purchases it in 1984, just to put a little orientation here, $60,000 was the
Right.
price he paid for that property, and he had it for 25 years until 2009. What happened in those 25 years?
Well, he had his practice there, again, third doctor. He had eventually moved out of there, and he had tenants in there. And that's where the next chapter of this house begins, because the date is February 26, 2005. At 2:30 in the morning, the house catches on fire. And it's a very significant fire. 2 people died.
It was all apartments then?
There was a store on the first floor. It was all apartments except for the store on the first floor, which unfortunately was an upholstery store. And I say that because it's rather flammable.
Right.
So it didn't help matters when the building caught on fire.
And so 2 of the tenants or people staying there passed away
Right.
in the fire. Oh my goodness. And I know one of the interesting things that you shared with me about the report is that you actually interviewed the fire department about it.
I did.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't find anywhere what caused the fire. And the reason I found out is what I was told by them. It was suspected arson, but they couldn't prove it, and they couldn't ever find anybody to prosecute for it.
What made them suspect arson? Do you know?
I don't know, and they weren't saying.
I see. Yeah, it probably makes sense. They probably
Right.
weren't. Were there any recollections of the scale of the fire? What got destroyed?
Yes, the scale was absolutely incredible. It was so intense that at 3:00 in the morning, they ordered all the firemen out. And then they thought, well, we'll let them go back in for a second shot at it, because by then the third call had come in, so they had a lot of help there. And they called them back out again permanently because the roof was going to collapse, which it did. And the entire house was engulfed. Really, the only thing that was saved, I think some of the pillars on the porch were saved, and because it was brick. So
Yeah.
the whole top part was gone. It was not brick.
Yeah. The way, and we'll be able to edit some pictures into this video, it really looked like the first floor brick was there and most of the second floor brick, but the whole third floor part was gone. It was
Right.
just kind of flat on top, and the
Right.
third floor was missing. And so when that fire happens, right? What happens with the insurance money? This is something people don't understand, is like, it's not like you can just take that check and go. Like, what happens with it?
Well, he wanted to demolish it, and of course that insurance money would have gone towards that, but he couldn't demolish it because it was built too soon. It was part of the historical community on Millionaires Row. So the city stopped him.
So because there's covenants, there's rules now because it is a historic district. So there's different rules for
Right.
ownership there. So that's important for people to understand. Like, yes, like as an owner of this building, I am essentially deed restricted to certain terms and conditions
Right.
of what I can do to it. Okay.
Right. So he took it to court, and there was a hearing, and he had architects come in explaining it would cost upwards of $1 million to have this fixed, and the property would only be worth a couple $100,000 when it was done. But it didn't deter anybody. So you got another architect to agree, yes, that's true. It didn't matter. He lost it, and then they took it to appeal. And when they went to appeal it, the judge just said, no, you can't tear it down. In the meantime, he was using his money because he had to preserve what was left. And there were pictures of tarps on it and everything trying to stop, because this was years. These trials were years in the making. This didn't happen overnight. So every time it rained, more of it got destroyed. And if they were going to try to preserve it, they had to preserve what was left.
Right.
So he had to put quite a bit of money in escrow.
Yeah, that escrow is something that protects the city from somebody just kind of taking the money and running and leaving this burden
Right.
on the community.
Right.
So yeah, you said it was when in 2005? What month?
It happened in February of 2005.
Oh my gosh, early. And so we
Yeah.
didn't see an end to this legal battle until 2009?
2007.
2007. Okay, so what does the end of that legal battle look like? So what happened? Where did we end up?
Well, there was a lot of fighting back and forth between the preservationists and Dr. Eckhard. It was not amicable at all. And so he refused to sell the building to the preservationists who wanted to buy it. And he had no choice at this point. So they came
He
up.
had lost the court
He had
battle to do
lost
what
it.
he wanted. I see.
Yeah, and he couldn't spend the $1 million to fix it. So he decided that through arbitration, they would sell it to a horse rescue for $1. And then the horse rescue would sell it to Preservation Williamsport. It was, I don't know what it was. It was interesting, but that's what they did.
Yeah.
And so
The way, remind me if I'm wrong, that you described it to me like a closing happened in a lawyer's office or whatever at like 11 a.m. and then that closing's over to the horse rescue, and then an hour later the horse rescue goes to Preservation Williamsport, does another one, and I think you told me they might have made $2,500 for their trouble or something.
Yeah, Preservation gave them some money for all their trouble. And the horse rescue never had anything to do with any of this. They were just trying to find some nonprofit that could just step in there and be arbitrative to stop the fight. They could not have Eckhart and Preservation Williamsport in the same room anyway.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that's how that went. And then they owned it and fixed it up. But.
Yeah, you would have to assume the owner, Dr. Eckhart, didn't have replacement value on his insurance policy.
I would assume he didn't, but the reason he wanted to tear it down was actually because his son had a practice next door and his son wanted to expand.
Oh.
And that would have been the parking lot.
I see.
You know what's better than building generational wealth? Not a damn thing. And obviously the best way to do that is through buy and hold real estate. But let's be real, managing your properties yourself, that's a one-way ticket to burnout. This is supposed to be an investment, not a burden. At One Focus Property Management, we don't just manage your properties, we make buy and hold real estate actually work. We handle everything: tenant screening, maintenance, rent collection, you name it. All you do is watch your portfolio and net worth grow. We make sure you never even think about quitting real estate investing, because the secret to buy and hold is to hold it for a very long time. And you can't do that when you sell every time you have a problem. We're the biggest, baddest property management team in Lycoming, Clinton, Northumberland, Montour, and Columbia counties. And we do it all to give you more protection, less work, and absolutely no drama. So let's turn your rental properties into wealth building machines. Learn more at onefocuspm.com. That's onefocuspm.com.
So that was just, he was no longer practicing in the building, and that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah, totally. And I can understand, he's a property owner in America. It can be difficult to feel like I own this property and somebody's keeping me from doing what I can do with it.
Yeah.
To give you an idea, my insurance agent just recalculated the replacement value, and we're up around 1.1 million these days. And the latest price this property traded at was $340,000.
Right.
Yep. So the money that it costs to rebuild this, somebody took a bath.
Right. They would have had to, because they didn't sell it for $1 million.
Absolutely.
And
No.
but because of it, we have this now. And just to be clear, they did not rebuild it exactly the way it was. The inside,
Oh,
as
of
you know,
course. Yeah.
is not the same.
Yeah.
They preserved the outside. There's nothing left to preserve on the inside.
Yeah, so what is original and remains of this property is the brick garage, I would assume most of the red brick on the exterior, the stone,
Right.
stone, and you can still see fire damage on
Right,
that.
you
It
can.
flakes really routinely. And then the basement. So the stone basement, the 1868 basement is there. Otherwise, everything on the interior is brand new. So the first floor, just, the basement has some storage space and is future expansion for us. The first floor is offices, conference rooms. It's nothing that interesting. The second floor is a gorgeous, huge apartment, about 1,200 square feet and very, very nice, 2-bedroom. And then the third floor is each 1-bedroom, 1-bath. So 2 of those up there. Central air, gas, heat, very modern in terms. It's the only new construction, colonial revival or Victorian in Williamsport, to my knowledge, that on the interior is completely new.
Right.
Which is something I really like as a young lady who hopes to be a steward of this for a very long time. And so I think it is a real victory, though, for Preservation Williamsport in the city to have endured that conflict to preserve. And it's the first historic property at the beginning of Millionaires Row. That row wouldn't start on the right until halfway down the block.
Right.
If you didn't have this one. So the next chapter of the property begins in 2010 when the Bernardi sisters, LLC, rebuilt the building. And what I knew them to have done is to house their business, Eagle Rock Winery, there. And then the second floor was at one of their, it was the living quarters, like a home, and it's done to that level. It's kind of done like an owner's suite. And then they had the apartments upstairs. And so they operated that for many years. And really not much else happened there besides Eagle Rock Winery for a short time as like a catering company, event venue. And actually since 2021, it's been the headquarters for One Focus. And now we have the residential units. And the really cool thing about this is we will be long-term owners of it. We will be long-term stewards, and it serves our buildings or our needs so well. We're, of course, expert at managing rental properties, and that's very comfortable for us, but it allows us to grow into that building and not have to move. And so we're really happy about that. What I want to know, though, is what is the value in your opinion, because there is so little of this original left. And I was going through this going, this is what we ended up saving, right? And this is what you're standing on my street looking at right now. What is the value in preserving it? Is it to keep that picture? Is it to keep the picture of the whole neighborhood together? What do you think is the value?
I think it's a lot that, but the big value is you actually preserve the history of part of the history of Williamsport and the whole history of the house when you preserve the building. Because had that been torn down, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
If you don't see it, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah. If there's no insurance policy on it, it couldn't exist.
And I don't know how many people would have ever heard of Dr. Hunt. And he was such a huge part of Williamsport for so many years.
Was he? Is there other things that did he just have a lot of impact in terms of he was a popular physician, or did he contribute in other ways?
Physicians contributed greatly in Williamsport. They were called out for accidents. They would save lives. Didn't really matter what kind of physician you were. You were pretty much, at some point,
a first responder.
Going to be a first responder, right? And
Interesting.
he was just very well known, and the fact that he built it to begin with was pretty amazing.
Well, that's so cool. I just want to ask you, because you've done so many, is there any fun, juicy stories about anything in Williamsport that you could share, historically speaking? Anything fun?
There are so many. And people have talked about it because people look for juicy stories. And there are a lot out there. But I think my very favorite stories come from my family.
Oh, yeah?
Because my great-grandfather was a boom rat. So that means he walked on top of the logs and he sorted the logs to go into the right owner's booms. And the stories that I've heard of him doing that have been amazing. They all live down in an area called the Patch at the foot of Rose Street.
Oh.
And they lived a life that is, for me, idyllic. They did not think so at the time. But they would go out and pick dandelion greens for lunch and have it with catfish they got out of the river. My grandfather actually lived on a riverboat for a while right there at the Patch. My dad wrote a series of stories called The Patch Brats that talk about how he lived when he was a kid, because they were all family or friends, so all the doors were open. When you got hungry, you just went in somebody's house and ate. There were pumps, there were outhouses, there were stoves on porches. My grandmother was in the big Millionaires mansions because she worked there, so I got to hear that side of the story you never hear.
Oh.
And those stories...
The downstairs story.
Right,
I
exactly.
see.
And those stories were never written and recorded officially.
No.
But they shaped who we are today. And I find that they are very important to share because that's what made our community what it is now.
Yeah.
So I love those stories.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us today. So, I did want to share just one quick story that I had of mine. So one of the stories I love to picture, because it's written about so colorfully, is Peter Hurdick built, at the time it was the Hurdick House Hotel, Hurdick House Hotel, now then became known as the Park Place Hotel, and it was going to be open with gas lights, right? And that was a novel thing. The railroad came, they had a beautiful restaurant, it was a beautiful hotel, and it was to have gas lights and be all lit up on opening night. And he had built the gas plant, manufacturing plant, across the street to service the town in this big hotel. And so it was all supposed to be lit up, and the day of the opening, the gas plant burns to the ground. And then he had to send all of the workers out into the town to buy all the oil lamps and candles for the opening night. And I don't know, I always think that's so amusing to think, like, the train's coming with all the people and it's dark and the gas plant, I mean, we just say it casually, the gas plant burned to the ground. Like what did that look like? How hot was that? Are we still expecting a train to our town?
And that's so typical of Hurdick because nothing went right for him.
Right. Well, maybe he was a little rammy-jammy. Maybe he was moving a little too fast, but he did great things. Well, tell us a little bit more about how people can connect with you if they want to get more in touch with their Lycoming property history.
Well, they just have to go on developinghistory.com, and there's a tab there for property research. All the information is right there.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for appearing on this, our bonus episode to season 1 of Hold It with PM Jen. And I think Elaine will agree with me. As Wilson Phillips says, we just need to hold on for one more day. Join us next season.